nobody was supporting it.
I think I was in high school, or like early 80s or somewhere.
There is a famous book about Watergate. Everybody knows the two names on the cover. What almost nobody knows is that the book may never have existed without a third man, and his name appears nowhere inside it. He suggested it. He pushed for it. He paid an enormous personal price to own it, giving away 2 years of his own future to a studio. And he did all of this in 1973, when Nixon had just won 49 states and the story looked dead. His name was Robert Redford, and he stayed quiet about it on purpose. The year he owned the world. To understand how big the secret was, you first need to understand how big the man was who carried it. 1973 was Robert Redford's year, in a way very few actors ever experience. It felt like a coronation. In October, The Way We Were, Sidney Pollack's sweeping romance with Barbra Streisand, arrived in theaters and became the 5th highest-grossing film of the year. Then, on Christmas Day in 1973, Universal released The Sting. The film brought Redford back together with Paul Newman and director George Roy Hill, the same team behind Butch Cassidy and The Sundance Kid. This time, the result was even bigger. The Sting became a phenomenon. It went on to gross $257 million worldwide, became the top-grossing film of 1974, and passed American Graffiti as the highest-grossing film in Universal's history. Only Jaws would later move past it, 2 years after that. Award season only made the moment feel larger. At the 46th Academy Awards, The Sting received 10 nominations and won 7. Among those wins were Best Picture, Best Director, Best Original Screenplay, and Best Film Editing. It beat The Exorcist, William Friedkin's horror giant, which had also been its rival at the box office. Edith Head won her 8th and final Oscar for the costumes. Marvin Hamlish's adaptation of Scott Joplin's Ragtime, especially The Entertainer, became a chart-topping success. The soundtrack produced a top 10 single and helped bring a forgotten American musical style back into popular culture. The fact at the center of all this was simple. With those two pictures, Redford stood as the top American box office attraction. And the scale only grew when you looked wider. Jeremiah Johnson, released in 1972, kept earning strongly through 1973 and into its 1975 re-release. Its total would have placed it second among 1973's releases. Butch Cassidy and The Sundance Kid returned to theaters because The Sting had become such a sensation, and that re-release pushed it into 1974's top 10 once again. In 1974, Redford became the first performer since Bing Crosby in 1946 to have 3 films among a single year's 10 highest grossers. Beginning in 1973, he entered a 4-year stretch of uninterrupted box office success. Yet inside the huge success of The Sting sits one of the strangest details in Hollywood history. Redford's performance as Johnny Hooker earned him a nomination for Best Actor. It was the only acting nomination he ever received, across a career that lasted more than 60 years. No second nomination ever came. He did not win that one either. So the man standing at the peak of American stardom, the bright face of New Hollywood, and the most bankable star in the country, still occupied a strange place in the eyes of the Academy. He was treated as a movie star more than an actor. Redford understood that. The feeling stayed with him. It worked on him quietly. And while all of this success was unfolding in public, he was already reaching toward something else. The phone calls nobody knew about the secret started the year before, on a train. In the summer of 1972, Redford was traveling on a press tour for The Candidate, a film about an idealistic politician who slowly loses himself inside the machinery of a campaign. During the trip, he spent time around a group of journalists and heard them talking about a strange story coming out of Washington. It was the break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters inside the Watergate complex. More than that, many of them already believed Nixon had to know something about it. What struck Redford was not only the story itself. What struck him was how little urgency he sensed in the people discussing it. He asked them directly what they were going to do. The answer, as far as he could tell, was very little. Once he returned home, he began following the coverage in the Washington Post. 2 bylines kept appearing again and again. Later, he read a short profile of the reporters behind them. And that was when something clicked in his mind. He would later explain what caught his attention. One man was Jewish, and one was a WASP. One leaned Republican, and one was a liberal. One wrote well, and one did not. They did not get along, yet they still had to work side by side. Redford saw a movie there. At that stage, his idea was surprisingly modest. He imagined, in his own words, a little black and white movie made on a very small budget. He wanted 2 unknown actors. He did not plan to appear in it himself. He wanted only to produce it. What interested him was the work those 2 men had done during a summer when hardly anyone else wanted to touch the story. So he picked up the phone. Redford first called Bob Woodward in November 1972. The timing matters because it reveals a great deal about him. He reached out at the moment when Woodward and Bernstein seemed weakest. The 2 reporters had recently made a very public mistake in a story involving H.R. Haldeman, and their credibility was being openly attacked. That was the exact moment Redford chose to make contact. Later, he explained his thinking with a line that says almost everything about the instinct behind the move. People who take wild shots and miss interest me. At first, the reporters did not call him back. When Woodward finally returned the call, it happened while Redford was filming The Way We Were in 1973, and the response was dismissive. They were not interested. Their reasons had nothing to do with ego. What they felt was fear. Woodward later said he was cautious and doubtful from the start. He honestly wondered if the caller might be someone working for the Nixon White House. He even considered whether it could be a prank meant to compromise them. The pressure around them was intense. Bernstein put it even more plainly. He told Woodward they could not talk to Redford, and he worried about what might happen if the Republican National Committee learned they were speaking to Hollywood. That image is almost unbelievable when you stop and think about it. In 1973, the biggest movie star in the world was being treated with suspicion by 2 reporters in a newsroom who wondered if he might somehow be connected to Nixon. At the very same time, millions of people were watching Redford on screen without the slightest clue that any of this was going on behind the scenes. The meeting in the hotel bar. Redford backed off for a while. He did not give up. In the spring of 1973, James McCord, the electronics expert convicted in the Watergate burglary, sent a letter to Judge John Sirica. In that letter, he implicated the Nixon administration and gave support to the core of what Woodward and Bernstein had been reporting. Suddenly, the ground shifted. The story no longer looked fragile. Redford picked up the phone again, and this time he pushed harder. Eventually, they agreed to meet. Here, the story takes on one of those details that sounds made up, even though it is true. The meeting was secret. Years later, during a panel discussion in 2006, Redford described it with a dry sense of humor. Aware of the irony, he said it happened in a secret place, though not in a garage. It happened in a bar at the Jefferson Hotel. That detail feels almost too perfect. The most famous hidden meetings in American political history would later take place in an underground parking garage between Woodward and a source the world came to know as Deep Throat. Yet Redford's own hidden meeting, the meeting that helped make a movie about those events possible, happened over drinks a short distance from the White House. Even then, Woodward and Bernstein struggled with the decision. They spent a long time debating whether cooperating was wise. They worried about what it meant to go Hollywood. They worried even more about how it would look to Ben Bradley and Katharine Graham at the Post. At a later meeting in New York, screenwriter William Goldman joined them. Goldman had written Butch Cassidy and The Sundance Kid. At one point, Woodward and Bernstein stepped out of the room. As soon as they were gone, Redford turned to Goldman and said the movie was sitting right there in front of them. He saw it clearly in the two reporters, in their clashing personalities, and in the way their friction kept pushing the investigation forward. By then, he had found the film he wanted. At the same time, without fully meaning to, he had already begun changing the shape of the story itself. The deepest secret, he made the book happen. This is the part very few people know, and it may be the closest thing to a truly buried secret in Redford's entire 1973. All the President's Men came out in 1974 and became a huge bestseller. It turned into the defining first-person account of the reporting that helped bring down a president. What Redford had done, through all his pressure and persistence in 1972 and 1973, was guide Woodward and Bernstein toward a different way of thinking about their own story. He convinced them that the most compelling subject was not only the burglary itself. The real story was the reporting, the long chase, the frustration, the dead ends, and the two men trying to do the work. Woodward later acknowledged in Telling the Truth About Lies that Redford played an important role in shifting the focus from Watergate as an event to the investigation as a lived experience. Then, in 1980, Los Angeles Magazine pointed to a report from the Los Angeles Times that revealed something extraordinary. The book had been written at Redford's suggestion, yet his name did not appear in the acknowledgments. His role became known only later through Jack Hirschberg's portrait of all the President's Men. That fact deserves a pause. One of the most important works of American journalism in the 20th century was shaped in a major way by a movie star. He received no credit inside the book, and at the time he told almost no one. He did eventually secure the rights in 1974 for $450,000. According to a July 1974 item in Parade, the money came from Warner Brothers. The arrangement was tied to Redford's agreement to appear in 2 more films for the studio. In effect, he gave away 2 years of his own future labor as an actor in order to own a story about journalism. Later on, Dustin Hoffman was revealed to have wanted the rights for himself, only to discover too late that Redford had already completed the deal. Hoffman ended up playing Bernstein, and the casting fits so perfectly that it is hard to picture the film any other way. The risk becomes even more striking when you lay out the timeline. When Redford first began chasing this story, Nixon had just won re-election in a landslide across 49 states. When Redford first called Woodward in November 1972, the reporters were publicly taking damage over a major error. At that point, there was no book, there was no resignation, there was no certainty that Watergate would become anything more than an odd footnote tied to a third-rate burglary. Even so, Redford put his own money on the line. He used his standing with the studio. He committed 2 future films worth of his own labor, and he did all of that because he believed that 2 young reporters at a newspaper might bring down the President of the United States. He placed that bet while the world still saw him as the man in the tennis sweater. The grudge he nursed since he was 13. There was something deeply personal driving all of this, and Redford said very little about it. A March 1976 Time cover story about the making of the film revealed that Redford's pursuit of Watergate was shaped in part by a plain and lasting dislike of Richard Nixon. That feeling went back to a moment that almost sounds invented for fiction. When Redford was 13 years old, the then Senator Richard Nixon handed young Bobby Redford a tennis trophy. It was a small moment on the surface. A boy took a trophy from a politician. About 25 years later, that same boy had become the most famous man in America, and he quietly began putting together the film that would permanently attach that politician's disgrace to the public imagination. He never turned that connection into a public show. He simply kept working and built the film. The other secret on the set, the movie. He actually wanted to make The Way We Were is remembered as a sweeping romantic drama, but very few people watching it in 1973 knew that its leading man had fought for a very different film. Redford had wanted something far more political, and he lost that fight. He had not wanted the part in the first place. Hubble Gardner, the handsome athlete turned writer, seemed too thin to him as a character. In a November 2010 interview with Oprah Winfrey, Redford said he thought the script was strong and perfect for Streisand, but he felt the original version of Hubble was one-dimensional. He and Sidney Pollack kept working on the role until Hubble became more layered, a man people kept projecting meaning onto even when he did not fully understand himself. Even so, Redford still wanted more from the story. The second half of the film deals with the Hollywood blacklist and the House Un-American Activities Committee, and he pushed hard to make that material the center of the picture. As he later explained, he wanted something more political, something closer to a Dalton Trumbo kind of script. Pollack would not go that way. In Redford's memory, the director stood firm and insisted the film was first of all a love story. Redford gave in, trusted Pollack's judgment, and later admitted that Pollack had been right. After a preview screening, much of the McCarthy-era material was removed. Scenes about political persecution, thought control conferences, and the machinery of the witch hunt were cut back or taken out completely. A screenwriter caught in the blacklist was reduced almost to a trace. What stayed on screen was the romance, powerful and heartbreaking, with very little politics left in it. That is what makes the timing so striking. In 1973, while he was standing on a set where the story of a government turning on its own citizens was being trimmed out of his film, Redford was spending breaks on the phone to Washington, trying to build another film about a government turning on its own citizens. The record is clear that The Way We Were was shot during the Watergate scandal. The politics he could not keep alive on screen in 1973 were the same politics he was quietly shaping into a different film that would arrive in 1976. There is another irony here, and it has only grown sharper with time. Redford's doubts about Hubble were very close to the doubts he carried about himself. He felt Hubble was a beautiful surface that others mistook for substance, and he feared that people saw him in the same way. In a strange way, he was being asked to play the version of himself he least wanted to be. Critics noticed then, and have kept noticing since, that Hubble is not the most forceful presence in the film. Streisand's Katie shines more fiercely. Redford understood that before the cameras even rolled. He said so himself. One exchange survived all the cutting, and now it feels almost like a message hidden in plain sight. Hubble says that people matter more than a witch hunt, more than causes, more than principles. Katie answers that people are their principles. What the secret became. The film Redford had been quietly building since a train ride in 1972 finally arrived in April 1976. It was All the President's Men, directed by Alan J. Pakula, starring Redford as Bob Woodward and Dustin Hoffman as Carl Bernstein, and produced through Redford's own company, Wildwood Enterprises. He pushed for accuracy with a level of intensity that almost became an obsession. He spent time around the Washington Post newsroom so he could learn how reporters actually moved, talked, and worked. During production, a great deal of the dialogue was rewritten or improvised on set. Redford reportedly called Woodward and Bernstein 5 or 6 times a day to ask whether his changes still felt true to life. The script went through conflict as well. William Goldman's original draft was rejected by almost everyone involved, including Pakula, Redford, Woodward, Bernstein, and the Post itself. Bernstein and Nora Ephron, who was then his girlfriend, wrote their own version. Goldman viewed that as a betrayal, and Redford eventually felt their draft missed the mark. Redford and Pakula then shut themselves away in the Madison Hotel across from the Post and kept rewriting. Redford later claimed that only about 10% of Goldman's script remained, though that claim has long been disputed, especially since Goldman won the Academy Award for the screenplay. The film received 8 Oscar nominations and won 4. Jason Robards won Best Supporting Actor for playing Ben Bradley, and Goldman won Best Screenplay. The film lost Best Picture to Rocky. Yet the approval that mattered most came from the 2 reporters at the center of the story. In 1976, Woodward told Time that the film had taught him something about journalism itself, and then gave it the simplest and strongest praise possible. He said the movie was not just pretty damn true, he said it was true. Bernstein said the filmmakers had done a spectacular reporting job in order to make it. There was one more hidden layer inside the film, and Redford handled it with the same care he gave everything connected to sources. When it came time to cast Deep Throat, he worried about one thing in particular. If the real identity ever came out after the film's release, and the person looked nothing like the actor chosen to play him, the whole movie might seem ridiculous. Redford asked Woodward directly whether Hal Holbrook was the right choice. Woodward could not reveal the truth, so he said nothing. Pakula took that silence as approval and kept Holbrook in the part, the secret held for decades. Then, on May 31, 2005, former FBI official W. Mark Felt revealed that he had been Deep Throat, the empire he was building in the mountains. There was another thing Redford was quietly building in 1973, and this one was made of land. Back in 1961, long before major fame arrived, he went to Utah and bought 2 acres for $500. Then he built a cabin there with his own hands. Years later, he told CNN that he had discovered something essential in that place. Nature mattered to him in a profound way, and he wanted to live where it felt powerful, harsh, and lasting. He kept buying land after that. By the end of the 1960s, he had acquired a struggling ski area in a canyon above Provo and renamed it Sundance, after the character that had made him famous. Through the 1970s, while films like The Sting, The Way We Were, and The Great Gatsby were pouring huge sums of money into Robert Redford, part of that money was flowing straight back out into Utah land. In the most literal sense, he was turning movie stardom into mountains. At the time, nobody watching him could have fully understood where this was leading. Redford himself may not have seen the final shape yet. Then, in 1981, on land he had bought years earlier, he founded the Sundance Institute. It was a nonprofit built to support risk-taking and new voices in American film because he had seen too many important stories being shut out and decided to back the people trying to tell them. In 1985, the Institute took over the U.S. Film Festival and gave it a new name, the Sundance Film Festival. What followed became a major part of modern American independent cinema. Steven Soderbergh came through with Sex, Lies, and Videotape in 1989. Quentin Tarantino followed with Reservoir Dogs in 1992. Then came filmmakers such as Paul Thomas Anderson, Robert Rodriguez, Kevin Smith, and Ryan Coogler, whose Fruitvale Station appeared in 2013. Films developed through the Sundance Labs included Kimberly Pierce's Boys Don't Cry and Dee Reese's Pariah. A man who stood at the center of the studio system used his success to build a path away from it. Late in life, Redford spoke openly about what the whole structure had always meant to him. In a 2018 interview with the Associated Press, he said the word that mattered was independence. He had always believed in that word. He had worked inside the mainstream, and because of that, he could clearly see which stories were being left out. So he decided to create a place where those storytellers could have a chance. Looking back, he said he felt very good about that. The land he bought in 1961 for $500 and 2 acres eventually became the home of an institution that changed the possibilities of American film. That began quietly too, as one more private project that people around him did not fully understand. The Mask, a sex symbol who hated the word. The final secret of 1973 was not a project. It was a feeling. That year, Redford was perhaps the most photographed face in the world, yet he had deep contempt for the image built around him. He spoke with open scorn about his own glamour, calling it a real handicap and using even harsher language in private about what he thought it was worth. He never believed beauty had much to do with the work. In his own mind, he was a misfit, and that feeling shaped the parts he wanted. When George Roy Hill offered him Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, Redford was first considered for Butch because he had recently done a comedy and seemed suited to the lighter role. He did not want it. The part did not interest him. What he wanted was the Sundance Kid. Decades later, he explained why. He felt he could connect to that character through his own childhood and experience, because he had felt like an outlaw for most of his life. Hill knew Paul Newman was the natural choice for Butch, so he switched the parts. Redford later said he would always be grateful to Newman for helping him get Sundance. That is what sits underneath the public image. The golden boy of American movies privately believed he was the outlaw. After Redford's death, Josh Brolin remembered him in exactly those terms. He called him a misfit, driven by inner grit, a man who moved to the beat of his own drum. The griefs he never discussed. At the center of him, there was also a silence that had nothing to do with Hollywood. In 1959, Redford's first child, a son named Scott Anthony, died in infancy. Redford was 23 then, unknown, and far from the fame that would later make every corner of his life public. He almost never spoke about the boy. Many years later in 2020, his son James Redford, a filmmaker and environmental activist, also died. Of his 4 children, Redford outlived 2. He was never a confessional man. He did not turn private pain into public performance. He did not build a memoir around it. Instead, as he did with Watergate and later with Sundance, he responded by making something. The same instinct that led him to spend 1973 quietly putting together a film about accountability may also help explain why he never put his grief on display. The man who kept building. In many ways, everything Redford did after 1973 looks like a long effort to move beyond the image that 1973 fixed in place. He made his directing debut with Ordinary People in 1980 and won the Academy Award for Best Director, the competitive Oscar that acting never brought him. He later directed A River Runs Through It and Quiz Show. He served as a trustee of the Natural Resources Defense Council for more than 50 years. He fought for the Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act in the 1970s, and in later decades, he kept battling against mining projects and efforts to reduce national monuments. The honors continued to come. He received the Cecil B. DeMille Award in 1994, the Screen Actors Guild Life Achievement Award, the Kennedy Center Honors in 2005, and an Honorary Academy Award in 2002 that recognized him as an actor, director, producer, creator of Sundance, and a lasting inspiration to independent filmmakers. In 2016, Barack Obama awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom. In 2018, after The Old Man and the Gun, he announced his retirement from acting. A year later, he stepped away from operational duties at Sundance. Robert Redford died on September 16, 2025, in his sleep at his home at Sundance in the mountains of Utah. He was 89. His publicist, Cindy Berger, said he died in the place he loved, surrounded by the people he loved. His family asked for privacy. The tributes that followed captured the life of a man who had spent decades being underestimated because of his face. Jane Fonda said he represented an America still worth fighting for. Meryl Streep, his Out of Africa co-star, called him one of the lions. Barbara Streisand, the woman who stood opposite him in 1973 while he was quietly calling Washington, described him as charismatic, intelligent, intense, and one of the finest actors ever. She later appeared at the Academy Awards to speak about him. And Bob Woodward, the same man who once wondered whether Redford's phone call might be some kind of White House trick, paid tribute too.